And welcome to this special podcast. As you know, I've been doing these Suppress Herald podcasts pretty much based on a weekly review of our Suppress Herald locally, our main USA newspapers that were bought by the National Trust for Local News, aka liberal billionaires, Soros, Omidyar, Bill Gates. Took over the newspapers across all of Maine. I call it the Suppress Herald, and it basically earns its name on a weekly basis. I had a little hiatus from doing podcasts, and just because I have a real job and had to do that. And one thing I wanted to do is I did a little catch up. I have been reviewing. Those who've been listening to the podcast know that basically I do a weekly review, go through all the newspapers. They're 6 days a week from the Suppress Herald here in Portland, Maine, and they I go through the editorial section on a daily basis and for the week and determine the letter writers letters to the editor and the editorial on the editorial page and grade it based on liberal, conservative, or neutral. There's a lot of neutral these days with talking about a new wing of the Portland or the Portland art gallery, and there's a historic building next to the existing Portland Art Gallery, and they want to tear it down and do a new wing, modern wing, and there's a big fight, as you might imagine, this old historic building with columns and all. And those that want to preserve that, and those the city council recently voted to allow them to tear it down, and so that's all over the papers. That's neutral. But liberal is very easy to figure out. It's basically the anti-Trump, not much pro-Biden. It's mostly just, orange man bad letters to the editor on a regular basis. And is a list of basically our most pressing issues. And this is something that I decided to grade and get a little look at over a 10-week period. And not only looking at the editorial side, but just in general articles in the Suppress Herald. And there are a number of really hot button issues that the Democrat Party, the Biden campaign, liberals are pushing. They don't have much to talk about because across the country, you got inflation and the economy is basically teetering, and you have all sorts of issues. The immigration issue, the border is a disaster, crime, fentanyl crisis, wars, Russia, Ukraine, Hamas, and Israel, China rattling swords. Things are not good. And so they need to pretty much focus on anything they can grasp to try and keep things going. So basically, you have five different subjects that are highlighted in the paper with articles and so forth continuously. The number one is climate. In a 10-week period, there were 63 combined articles or editorials on climate. A new one is the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court keeps passing down these decisions that are not in the liberal interest. Basically, they're deciding that the Constitution does not allow you to do these things that the liberals are trying to do, and they don't like that. So they're going after the Supreme Court. There were 7 articles focused on conservative justices on the court to try and ruin the reputation of the court and say that it's not fair. Pro-immigration, you had 15 articles about how wonderful immigration and immigrants are. You had 19 articles that were all about abortion and basically for abortion or scare tactics about Roe v. Wade being overturned. So basically, a pro-abortion bent on all those articles. And a very big one is call it the Second Amendment articles, the people that want to basically limit or take away guns and limit the Second Amendment. There were 54 articles dealing with that. Now, we had, as most people are aware, here in Maine, we had a mass shooting. It was a very, very tragic event. A mentally ill, basically reserve army reserve guy with a gun went in and murdered and injured a lot of people. So that's been huge to leverage that, and they've never let a good catastrophe go to waste type of thing. So I just did a little grading on that. And it's just unbelievable, and climate is the huge winner, although guns and Second Amendment right behind. One of the things I wanted to talk about today on this podcast is really what our media have devolved into, which is just propaganda. And, my tagline for this podcast is politics is local, and so is propaganda. And we see this every day when that newspaper arrives at the end of the driveway and you open it up, and it is nothing but propaganda. It is completely slanted in one direction. The articles, if they even write about conservative issues, generally slant against them. Or I think the biggest one, and that's where the Suppress Herald comes in, they suppress a lot of facts, a lot of details, a lot of information, and only report one side with an agenda. That is propaganda. I found this online, and it was propagandaprinciples.wordpress.com. And it really was kind of an interesting list here. The 9 fundamental principles of propaganda. One, big lie. Always choose the big lie over the small. The masses will believe it more readily. And apply this to any number of these issues. There's a big lie at the center of it. Climate change is a big lie. I'm not saying that the climate isn't changing. Nobody is saying that. But the scare tactics, the CO2 and made because of, it's caused by burning fossil fuels, there's a lot of big lies involved. And it's the biggest propaganda, I think, coup in history. Then you've got focus. Use only one or two, or at most two selling points, okay? Storms. Storms are stronger, storms are more frequent. That's number one in climate change. And again, this goes for all of these different aspects of what they're trying to propagandize and move on all of these agendas. But I'll just use the seeing as it climate change is at the dominating, focus on the propaganda sheet called the Suppress Herald. So the big lie focus is just one or two selling points, which they keep going and have been really debunked in a lot of ways. Repeat, use them over and over. Well, that's just on and on. You can't open the paper almost on a daily basis and not have some connection to climate change causing everything. It's kind of like, in a lot of cases, racist. You're a racist, and racism is causing everything, all these other problems. And I've heard, some of it's just incredibly stupid, but that's, repeat, blame, blame people, never credit the other side, debase, defame, dehumanize. Sound familiar? Janet Mills, our esteemed governor, when she was the Attorney General here in Maine, banded together a bunch of other attorneys general, and we're trying to get RICO charges put in place for climate deniers. In other words, if you denied that there was climate change happening due to anthropomorphic heating, in other words, global warming caused by burning fossil fuels, if you denied that, she wanted to put you in jail. So did all these various liberal state attorneys general. And that's, you know, unbelievable to me. So, and then you've got number 5, provoke. First attract attention, then appeal to emotions. Emotions is all that there is. It's hot. Turn up the propaganda machine. Global warming. We just had a heat wave, couple of days. Now it's all temperate and normal and even a little on the cool side. But no, we had a couple of hot days. Go to town. And I'll share today a few of those examples. Emotional symbols. Number 6. Crisis. Shades of gray don't work. Issues must be life, death, good, evil, freedom, slavery, love, or hate. Well, the climate crisis is what they push. Propaganda. Emotional symbols, good slogans have no literal meaning, only a strong emotional appeal. That's global warming. And then pander, ignore intellectuals and reasonable arguments, target the unthinking masses with powerful emotional pitches. And I think that's absolutely where we're at. I have raised on previous podcasts that there are, the CO2 Coalition specifically and other groups, a group of 1,200 scientists signed a proclamation basically stating that the whole global warming saber rattling and catastrophe and climate catastrophe and emergency and crisis was not that we can deal with it. Climate is changing, but it's not as bad as they're saying, and that we can deal with it and adjust and make adjustments to manage it. In other words, stop the craziness and stop basically causing our children to think there's no future, that the planet's going to burst into flames by the time they become adults. It's crazy. And when we think mental illness in children, scare the hell out of them. Fear, constant living in fear of all these boogeymen that the liberals are using to advance their agenda is causing a lot of these problems. So there's, definition of propaganda. And here we are. Now, I would say over those 10 weeks when I was looking at the, climate overwhelmingly, article after article after article, and then you had immigration, Supreme Court thereafter, abortion, and especially the Second Amendment with gun control. That was the dominating part of the paper. All liberal agenda items, all focuses that, abortion is basically all they've got going into this election. And they're going to crank that up like there's no tomorrow because they know they don't have anything else. So basically, here we have all these problems, all these challenges facing the states and the US and the world. And all they've got is let's just kill more babies. That's what it comes down to. So it's really an interesting thing when you start to analyze this, which is what I do. And over that same 10 weeks, I added up the liberal, conservative versus neutral editorial page. The editorial page alone, the liberal letters to the editor and editorials on the editorial page, liberal was 227, 23 a week average. Conservative was 23, 2.3 per week versus 23, 10 to 1. And neutral, 163. So those neutral local issues, I'm for tearing down the old building next to the museum. I'm against it. Local politics when it's, one liberal versus another. I just call that neutral. Basically the people running for city council in the city of Portland, it's liberal, liberalist, or liberaler. And so I count that neutral. So, you've got a situation here where it is extremely weighted, and it's getting worse. It actually is getting worse when you look at that 10-week period. That's 10 to 1. It used to be 5 to 1 on an average basis over a year. Now it's up to 10 to 1 because we've got an election coming and the panic mode is in. So I'd like to just go through briefly and just hit some of those individual categories, immigration. And I'll just read some headlines just to give you a feel for what they're doing. This was the business section. Immigration fuels U.S. economic growth. Acknowledging a highly charged social and political issue, Wall Street insiders say that no advanced economy has benefited from the influx of newcomers, quite like the United States. Who wrote this crap? You can't tell me. You read the papers and you listen to the news. New York City is being destroyed by billions and billions of dollars to house, feed, and take care of these people. And the crime is just overwhelming the city. You cannot tell me that's an economic benefit. And this is in cities across the country. Texas is a complete disaster, and they're spending billions of dollars trying to stop it on their own to slow down the influx. It is just crazy. So, on its face, that's propaganda. And then you've got a beautiful front page cover story in the main Suppress Herald Sunday paper. 1 year later, a place they can call home, and it's just a puff piece. Wonderful situation with illegal immigrants settling into the city and having a place of their own. Then you got, here we go again. Immigration emerges as key to job growth. A riddle that has confounded economists for at least a year. How has the U.S. economy managed to prosper at a time when the Federal Reserve has aggressively raised interest rates? Immigration. Yeah. Illegal immigrants, are taking hundreds of thousands of jobs. If you analyze, and they don't do this in this paper, you have to go look elsewhere, but analysis of the jobs growth is illegals are taking all the jobs. Americans are being left out. And federal government has been picking up the tab. Here's another one. Even low-skilled immigrants are a plus for the U.S. economy. Donald Trump is wrong on this one, and so are many mainstream economists. This is this is not anything but an opinion piece. Bloomberg opinion columnist. An opinion, even low-skilled immigrants are a plus. Right. And here we have Representative Shelley Pingree. Now, Shelley Pingree is the invisible congresswoman in Maine. She lives on an island, or she lives in Washington, D.C., mostly Washington, D.C. She is a complete Washington elitist. And you never hear about her until about now, every 2 years, when it's time, her signs start coming out and there's an election. And we're in a very liberal district in Maine, the Southern District, that they carved out very adroitly to pretty much ensure that that seat is safe. And Representative Shelley Pingree, let asylum seekers work. Let's remember 90, 80 to 90% of asylum seekers, when they have their cases adjudicated in front of a immigration judge, are denied asylum. In other words, they do not qualify for asylum. Special case. They have been told, you come to the border and you say, I'm fleeing oppression, I'm fleeing for my life, and you get asylum. They catch and release, give you a plane ticket somewhere in the country, and tell you to show up in 5 years. By then, how can we kick those people out? They're established here, they have children, all the rest. This system is designed to, in effect, destroy our country with massive migration. So here we have Shelley Pingree, let asylum seekers work. The federal government is standing in the way of a perfect marriage between willing workers and employers eager to hire. I don't have to even go any further. And then you have the whole front page Sunday Suppress Herald. Integration of immigrants starts from the ground up. Just ask Lewiston. The main city's experience of refugee resettlement holds important lessons for municipalities everywhere. Yeah, go up to ask people in Lewiston what they think of that. They didn't do that for that article, I can tell you that. Not one bit. So that's the pro-immigration puff pieces and telling us how wonderful it is. In other words, don't believe your lying eyes that they're overrunning services, that you have major problems. They're staying by the hundreds in hotels, taking up a lot of resources and causing a lot of problems. And then, of course, I don't even want to get into murder, rape, and all the rest of women across the country that's been happening. Nope, don't believe your lying eyes. It's all good. Then you've got, these Supreme Court, call it conservative court. I call it a court that's following the Constitution of the United States. And you have them going after, in a big way, the conservative justices. I guarantee you there's justices on both sides have taken some trips with friends. They have book deals. They have all sorts of things. I've already talked about book deals, I think, are a backdoor way to pay people off. Hillary Clinton's a perfect example. She got millions of dollars in an advance, and her books, the few that she sold are doorstops. It's just a way to pay somebody. Yep, we bought all your books. We bought thousands and thousands of your books. Here's your advance. The money came from this person over here and funneled it through the book company. So here we are with the Supreme Court. They're after. They want to pack the court. They want to minimize the court. They want justices to recuse themselves, conservative justices. So here's a flag incident adds to High Court's ethical clouds, a whole article. Well, you had Samuel Alito, his wife put a flag up upside down, I think, or whatever. There's some flag things. And yeah, it's kind of silly because who cares? That was one article. And then upside down flag flew at Justice's house after dispute. The report has prompted calls for Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito to recuse himself from a pair of high-profile January 6th related cases. There you go. Let's take them out. Here's this is just a cartoon, but I'll just read it and you can tell. Your son says inappropriate things, has no self-control, and doesn't take responsibility for his actions. And the parents, did you hear that? She thinks our boy could be a Supreme Court justice. It's just propaganda. They're trying to smear the Supreme Court because they don't like what the Supreme Court decisions have been. Here's an opinion piece, large one. Alito flag flap matters because ethics and dignity matter. What a bunch of garbage. So they're after the Supreme Court, and you see these articles in there that are really kind of just specious and stupid. This one maybe is the best. This is an editorial, and this is just priceless. We're moving on to abortion because that's about all they've got. So you're going to see a lot of articles, a lot of editorializing on abortion because that is pretty much the only thing they've got that's the hill they've got to stand on in this upcoming election. Abortion may save the republic with a little help from guns. This election year, women supported by male allies have the opportunity to effect significant change. In other words, we're going to make our hill to win this election is abortion and guns. That's about all they've got. And here's a huge article, big headline in the Suppress Herald. Abortion bans spell opportunity for Democrats. And they're going to spin that, and that's a huge, big editorial. And then there's just a puff piece. Remember, I talked about the whole thing with propaganda, emotional symbols. Good slogans have no literal meaning, only a strong emotional appeal. Here's a big puff piece, big article in the paper, the Suppress Herald. For some progressives, abortion talk is personal. Increasingly, candidates are talking about their own experiences with unwanted pregnancies. So they're going to pull out all the stops in the editorial section and across the Suppress Herald. And this is, again, I'll remind you that this is the National Trust for Local News buying up newspapers, small local newspapers, statewide, regional papers across the country, putting them under an umbrella and making sure that the editorial content is to the liking of the billionaires that are buying them. So one of those same billionaires, George Soros, is in the process of trying to buy a radio station chain with, last I saw, over 200 radio stations across the country. Buying up debt, they're in Chapter 11. He's buying up their debt to try and force his way into buying the radio stations. Hopefully, the Federal Trade or FTC will block that, but somewhat doubtful. So they're trying to buy the media so that they can lock down the propaganda. It's just an absolute no-brainer what's happening here when you actually analyze this. And hopefully listen to the Suppress Herald podcast. So now let's move on to, this is the global warming stack. Okay, and it comes in all different flavors, but it's all in one direction. Global warming is a catastrophic crisis that we have to do something about, and they're pushing us to do what they want us to do, and there are people on the end of that with a huge trough filling it with taxpayer dollars. And then you have, I've talked before, the carbon traders. Buy carbon offsets and everything will be fine. Pay somebody to plant some trees, and then I'll sell that carbon credit to Microsoft or Walmart or whoever wants to say that they're, put a green plaque on the front of the store. It's meaningless, and it's a massive, massive $1 trillion scam. And that's follow the money. So I'm just going to read off some quick headlines, keep things moving. U.S. planning to spend big to cut carbon footprints. Steel, cement, and cheese? Funds have been announced for 33 projects that are expected to eliminate more than 14 million metric tons of carbon emissions each year. This is the best. Americans love their macaroni and cheese, devouring millions of boxes each year, but producing all of that gooey yellow pasta takes a toll on the planet, since heating and drying the ingredients requires an enormous amount of energy. So, the Biden administration started spending $6 billion for 33 projects. Who's getting all this money? Our money. How about this? And a Michigan factory where Kraft Heinz makes its staple food of college dorm rooms everywhere. Kraft Heinz. John Kerry Heinz. The Heinz fortune. John Kerry, the global environmental whatever wackadoodle. John Kerry, no doubt, arranged for $500 million to Kraft Heinz. This is sick, picking winners and losers. And, you know, they could invest in saving all that energy themselves. They don't need my tax dollars to do it. This is sick, and this is all under the guise of climate change. And I'll go back to climate change pushing global food prices higher. Weather and climate shocks are already putting pressure on many key food supplies. Weather, weather, and climate shocks. Actually, if you want the truth, the planet is grossly greening naturally. Higher CO2 levels feed plants, trees, grass, crops, corn, all of that. And actually, NASA, National Aeronautic and Space Administration, right here in the US of A, where some of the biggest climate alarmists have come from, NASA studying from space has determined that the globe, our entire Earth, is greening naturally. We don't have to pay somebody to plant some trees and then use that as a carbon offset. It's happening naturally. So that kind of would pretend that there's going to be more food available if the planet is growing more. A lot of the deserts are receding. You aren't hearing about any of this. It's suppressed. The Suppress Herald. Here's another headline, and I've got a bunch of them. Among other impacts, climate change will affect our collective psyche, scientists say. No crap. Climate change will affect our collective psyche. Yeah, you are, you morons. You're affecting our psyche. You're making us all crazy. And you're making our children into little idiots worried about the future when it isn't nearly as bad. Again, climate's changing. Yes, the planet is changing. If the planet's not getting warmer or hotter, then the planet's dead. Period. It's not going to stay the same. It never will. It's always warm periods, cooling periods. This all happens. Again, ice. You put an ice cube in your freezer. You come back a year later. The freezer's been on. You've got backup, the whole thing. It's been below freezing, and it's at the same 0 Fahrenheit, well below freezing the whole time. The ice cube shrinks. How could that be? It's going to happen. Either the glaciers are expanding, increasing from snow and ice being built up, or glaciers are receding. It's one or the other. And there is a cycle. But they grab hold, scare us, funnel us into their money-making schemes, and wheel up the wheelbarrow to fill it up with our cash. The Sunday Suppress Herald. The winter that wasn't, unusually warm and mostly snow-free, the 2023-24 season in Maine has continued a long-term trend consistent with global climate change. And they show that the actual trend is from 1980. So 40 years. That's not a trend, not in the grand scheme of things. You can take a snapshot anytime you want. I can make it look like something, and then we can scare the hell out of people, and that's what they do. Here's another one. Climate change imperils even our pancake syrup. This is by like a columnist that just puts in drivel in the local Scarborough paper in Maine. More Suppress Herald nonsense. Frequency of ferocious storms, power outages on the rise. And this is for Columbia University public health researchers found the typical Maine customer went without power for longer than average between 2018 and 2020. Oh my goodness, for 2 years. So that's telling us that we have a global warming catastrophe. We had 2 years of higher storms. You could take any 2 year period and say it's outside of the norm. I could go in and find 2 years where temperatures were below the norm, where this frequency of storms were below. They take snapshots of this stuff and then just write these stupid articles. Earth sees hottest ever March, the 10th record-breaking month in a row. I've talked about this. Let's go back to our global warming or our propaganda sheet, you know. Crises, emotional symbols, pander, repeat, big lie, temperatures are rising. Carbon credit rules ease, giving a boost of green finance. You hear that? A boost to green finance. Carbon credit rules ease. In other words, we've made carbon trading easier so that we can buy and sell carbon credits. The trillion-dollar industry gets a boost. It was on the decline. Prices for carbon trading were going down, and that was a big problem. So they got fixed. So that scam is now up and running. And of course, you've got these articles one after the other. Biden administration awards the state 10.6 million to combat climate change. Combat climate change. Is that a good term? So you're going to stop climate change by spending money on raising some roads and climate change fight needs broader movement, new direction. This is the one where local wackadoodle with his local wackadoodle organization writes this garbage. I saved this. I wrote him a letter and got into a pretty good exchange with him, and he did exactly what was expected. Oh, those are studies funded by the fossil fuels industry, and same old, same old. Well, they're studies and they're scientific studies, and they were peer reviewed, and they discredit your narrative. I don't care who paid for it. Reputation, scientists with a reputation for integrity, solid data, solid science, peer reviewed, and they don't like what they see. I think that's in the propaganda sheet. Let's see here. Blame, never waver, acknowledge, no doubt. Always blame, never credit the other side. Debase, defame, dehumanize. Yep, there you go. Students to help coast plan for warmer, wetter future. Another threat to bees, rising temperatures. It's officially hotter than any time since the birth of Jesus. Except it's not, and that's BS. And there's science to show that. Why measuring greenhouse gases matters. Information drive changes in seafood industries. No surprise, bad weather causing outages. Twofold increase 2014 to 2023 compared to 2000 to 2009. Yeah, bad weather's causing outages. How about trees that aren't trimmed? How about budgets that aren't paid for to make sure trees are trimmed down the roads where the lines are and other things? Nope, it's weather. Last of Venezuela's glaciers melts amid climate change. Yep. As I told you, look up Venezuela, see where it is on a globe. It's pretty close to the equator. A lot of it's on the Caribbean. If their glaciers are not growing, they're shrinking. There's no in between. It never stays the same. Mills to form Climate Change Preparedness Commission. Of course, yeah. We're going to spend public money with a bunch of bureaucrats to run around and talk about it. Nobody's going to actually do anything. Climate Resilience Commission starts work in lucrative port, Stonington. Governor Mills creates newly created panel, plans to see how the state can help Maine communities whose needs do not always fit neatly into federal disaster relief categories. And experts predict busy year for Atlantic hurricanes. Ocean warming will combine with a La Nina weather pattern, will raise the risk of bigger storms. And here we are in July, and haven't had any big ones yet. Had one tropical storm, had some flooding down in the Caribbean or Central America, but haven't had much. It's there you go. That's just 10 weeks worth of headlines and everything from bees to trees to on and on. And it's just silly what's happening with the propaganda machine. So, yeah, the article about affecting our psyche, absolutely. Everybody thinks the world's going to end that reads and buys into this crap on a day-to-day basis. We need to stop. We need to just take a breath. Yes, we can reduce our carbon footprint. We can reduce the use of fossil fuels, but we can't stop it because if we stop it, the standard of living will go off a cliff. The ability to improve our buildings to use less energy, to the building to innovate with new transportation, with all the things that we want to do, innovation is going to take energy. And energy right now comes from gas and oil in a large part. And we can continue to transition, but the government running the program, that's a disaster. And meanwhile, in the back room, in those, in Congress, those backroom deals are favoring the people that look to make billions and trillions of dollars off the taxpayers over the whole global warming, carbon trading, renewable energy industry. And there's an entire industry of people that do nothing but talk about this stuff. They don't actually do anything constructive. So there you have it. Just wanted to talk about propaganda. Politics is local, so is propaganda. And this is the Suppress Herald podcast.